and welcome to Big Deal. In a significant transaction in the infrastructure space, bulge bracket private equity firm KKR plans to become the co-sponsor of an infrastructure trust, IndiGrid, along with Sterlite Power. Now, this is part of a larger transaction in which KKR and GIC have put together 2,000 crore rupees in the infrastructure trust through a preferential allotment of shares to hold 42% stake in IndiGrid. Now, KKR will buy an additional 15% stake from Sterlite Power to hold in total 57% along with GIC. Now, through this deal, KKR also seeks to buy 74% stake in the investment manager of IndiGrid in tranches over the next 2 years, owning a controlling stake of 60% immediately and the remaining 14% later. Now, IndiGrid will be utilizing the funds to buy transmission projects from Sterlite Power worth 11,500 crore rupees in a couple of years. 2 today and 3 on completion of these projects, and those are the large transaction details and the contours that they have shared. And I have with me right now the 2 gentlemen who struck this deal to throw more light on what they seek to achieve with this particular transaction. Let me welcome in the studio Sanjay Nair, who heads KKR in India, and also joining us straight from Sao Paulo in Brazil is Pratik Agarwal of Sterlite Power. Gentlemen, so good to have you on CNBC TV18. My first question straight to Sanjay. Sanjay, it's KKR's first investment through its Asia-Pacific infrastructure strategy. Why did you bet on this company? What's so attractive about this?
Well, I think, yes, you're right. This is the first investment in the infra space for us. I think a couple of things. Just from a top-down approach, if you deploy appropriate capital in this country, we have a lot of strategies here. Infra is something we've been looking at very carefully, and we haven't been comfortable for a long time, and I think we all know the reasons for this. I think today's government, with the past actions of the kind of investments they are making and the way they are driving the private sector to invest, Sterlite is a great example of how they have put so much money into the grids. I think gave us the confidence that if there was a deal to do, it would be in this space. That's number one. Number two, the innovation that was introduced through InvITs, frankly, wasn't catalyzed till now. You see REITs getting catalyzed, and we thought a great opportunity to catalyze infra capital inflows by doing a deal in an InvIT structure. Third, I think this was an opportunity of partnering with a great developer and a great operator like Sterlite. But I think the most important, from a capital point of view, we are actually underwriting and buying into very, very long-term, core, regulated infra asset, which are these transmission grids.
Right.
And that brings you back to the point, given today's policy, given the kind of public sector, contracts that they have, this makes it a very, very attractive, less worrisome, rather guaranteed cash flows coming from long-term 35-year take-or-pay contracts. So I think that is very important. I would say I'll stop there. I'm sure we'll talk more about it and more strategically what this means. But just from our point of view, first deal from a infra strategy point of view, great partner in Sterlite, an instrument created by the government, I think yet to be catalyzed, and we're beginning to see. You're seeing some private trust getting done, and this is a public trust. And something that I think we can grow. The interesting part is we are in control of a trust and a platform and a manager, which can be a basis of future growth. And you're seeing a lot of our strategies in India, where we're buying platforms and then really growing them. So I think I'll stop there and take it from here.
So Sanjay, it's important because it's also a strategic move by KKR in the infrastructure space. So coming to Pratik, then Pratik, 2 years back you took that plunge in the InvIT space with the listing of IndiGrid. Now, after 2 years, you have brought in KKR as a co-sponsor. What was the requirement of this, and what does KKR, in your view, as the sponsor of this InvIT, in your view, brings to the table for the company?
Sure, Nisha. Thank you very much for having us. First and foremost, we're absolutely delighted to partner with KKR. at IndiGrid as well as our investment manager. KKR is one of the largest money managers, asset managers in the world, and have a big breadth of experience across geographies, across sectors in raising capital and deploying capital. As you rightly said, we launched the IndiGrid through an initial public offering about 2 years ago. We started with 2 assets, grew that rapidly to about 6 assets, including 1 third-party asset. And as part of this transaction, we will take this platform from 6 assets to 11 assets, taking the total AUM to about 17,000 crores in a short span of 2 to 4 years. So we find this to be a fantastic partnership between 2 very complementary parties. Sterlite Power is one of the leading developers of power transmission systems in India and Brazil, and has a significant market share in both these markets. We also have a very unique experience of not only commissioning projects ahead of schedule, but also operating them with a very high availability. KKR brings the capital, the asset management knowledge, and access to global investors. I think as India looks to build out its entire grid on the back of the renewable revolution that we are seeing, it will need many such platforms like Sterlite, IndiGrid, KKR to come in through the PPP framework and participate in that growth. And we think this provides a fantastic platform for Sterlite, for KKR to actually pursue that opportunity.
Right, Pratik. So, in terms of the investment manager, and that's another part of the transaction, apart from being a co-sponsor in that InvIT, KKR will also buy out in 3 tranches, 74% stake, and immediately after this approvals, KKR will be holding 60% stake, which means that all the decision making will be controlled by KKR. So how will that operate with you having a minority stake or a significant minority in investment manager?
So Nisha, as I mentioned, this is a partnership. There are things that KKR brings to the table that we can never match, and there are things that we bring to the table perhaps which are difficult for KKR to match. Together we are a fantastic partnership. IndiGrid, as you know, has a standalone independent management team. They've always taken most decisions on their own, and they will continue to do so. Sterlite and KKR, myself and Sanjay will sit on the board, and we will be involved in key strategic decisions. We have our rights, they have their rights. I believe that this is going to be a very long and fruitful relationship where both parties will depend on each other for their relevant expertise, and I see it going a very long way.
All right, and
maybe
yes.
just add to that. I think that, we have a lot of expertise in the infra space in the OECD countries. This is one of the first transactions actually in emerging markets. So I think we can, as the controlling, but as Pratik said, kind of a partner at the investment management level, I think we can bring in a lot of expertise that we have from our experience in the developed world.
Right.
As it pertains to many other areas of further improving this platform. Debt capital markets being one, equity capital markets being another, other operational enhancements, what else you can build and diversify this with. So I think that is something that we will learn from our global infra experience and bring it to this platform. So I think that is something we firmly believe in, and I think also in a way the investment manager being controlled by the fund is actually good in a way for the trust. So I think it all adds up together.
Right. In terms of valuations, Sanjay, how do you see the sector and therefore this particular transaction? Because the price at which this company had listed 2 years back, the unit price at least is lower, and of course there is another part of return that comes in for the investor, which is the distribution yield, which has been on the rise for the company.
Yeah, I mean, look, I leave the maths to Pratik, but I would say broadly, these kind of assets that give you a pretty guaranteed cash flow ultimately trade like a fixed income instrument, right? So if the underlying yield goes up, then obviously it's going to trade down. And I think from the time they listed this entity to today, I think just the GSEC yields themselves have actually moved from the mid 6s to the mid 7s.
Yes.
And that itself, I think, is a bit of a hit on the price.
Yes.
I think the distribution they've come up couple of times. So I think if you add all of that together, I don't think it's that big a discount as things stand today. Where it goes from today, I think depends upon obviously the steadiness and the predictability of cash flows. It depends upon growth, and of course depends upon the underlying risk-free rate again. So depends where India's long-term yield curve goes. I think that will obviously affect the price. But you know, if you look at this from a long-term basis, these are the kind of instruments that will attract really long-term capital. Okay, this is not a 3, 4, 5 year game. This is long-term money coming in at a very different cost of capital.
So what is the kind of IRR that KKR would be looking at in this?
I was dying to tell you this answer, so I'm not going to give it to you.
No, but it's hovering around 10%, and they have projected a higher one as more assets come into play. But of course, before making any investment, financial sponsor, and here you're coming in as a strategic, you do have an assessment of the kind of returns you want to make out of an investment.
Yeah, but look, I think we're not going to give you numbers of how we underwrote this deal, right? But the fact is, you have to take into consideration, you know, where it's trading today, what a little premium we paid, what happens in the future in terms of, you know, where the GSEC goes, where the spreads go in the long run, and then of course, you know, we too can use a bit of financial engineering at our end for the equity stake we bought. You put all that together. Obviously, this is nowhere near private equity returns, but I think it probably pays adequately for the sovereign risk you take and the credit risk you take. And as I said, if you have a good partner with you like Sterlite and you're getting excellent O&M partnership there and a steady flow of assets coming in, and plus, you know, this platform will expand into other sub-asset classes, staying overall with the power thesis, but it'll grow into other areas. So you look at all of that, I think that this can have interesting returns. And then finally, if the capital market mix changes of who owns these units in the long run, and if you get the retail market activated here over time, which I think should happen, then I think, you know, these things can trade even better. And that one can't predict obviously what that will be like.
So InvITs and REITs are at a nascent stage, and as the market matures and deepens, of course, that benefit is going to come to the investors. But coming to Pratik, of course, in terms of acquisition, the funds that have been raised by the company InvIT, that is going to be utilized for buying out transmission projects from Sterlite Power. Can you give us the timeline and also the details of these transactions?
Sure, Nisha. Just to take you back a little bit, back to the IPO story. So when we launched this product in the market, it was really around a few fundamentals. The first one was that IndiGrid invests in these long-term 35-year annuity-like cash flows. And because of the guidelines, only in operating assets. It looks to give a consistent, predictable distribution on a quarterly basis. And most importantly, it looks to grow the platform in a value-accretive manner. So I think if I look back at the last 8 quarters, I feel that we have not only met but perhaps outperformed our original promises by delivering on the distribution that's been promised consistently, by growing this platform every single time in an accretive manner. And this latest transaction further bolsters the accretion story for the platform. Coming to the proceeds, so we raised about 2,500 crores through this transaction from a consortium led by KKR as well as a few other investors. This proceeds will go towards the first set of acquisitions, which is the NRSS project and the Orissa project. And we hope that these acquisitions will be complete as soon as we're done with the first final regulatory hurdles in the next perhaps months, not maybe weeks or months. Post this, we have the framework agreement under which IndiGrid will buy another 3 assets from Sterlite Power, and this will be consummated over the course of 2 years. Some will happen in the year 1, some will happen in year 2. But once all the transactions are done, IndiGrid will have an assets under management of roughly 17,000 crores. And if you compare that to the IPO AUM, which was 4,000 crores, we're looking at growing the AUM by almost 4 times once the transaction is done.
Right, and will this flip strategy of buying out the transmission projects from Sterlite Power continue post those 5 as well, Pratik?
Absolutely. So IndiGrid has a stated vision of achieving a 30,000 crore AUM along with value accretive and RR accretive growth. With this transaction, it will be about 60% through that journey. The journey will continue. Sterlite Power remains a strong and a long-term partner for IndiGrid and will continue to participate in government's program to build out a few lakh crores of transmission in India. And as those projects become operational, they will have conversations with IndiGrid to look at future flips. IndiGrid will also continue to pursue third-party acquisitions. You may recall that IndiGrid purchased one asset about a year ago from a third-party developer, and it will continue to pursue more such acquisitions.
You also mentioned in your earlier answer that this InvIT can have many more subsets. So are there any other areas that in the short term you plan to diversify into besides Sterlite Power's transmission assets?
I think the first focus has to be just on the assets that are committed to, and then the 5 that we have to get done. I think somewhere Pratik mentioned about renewables being an interesting space. Yes. I think that's something that we have taken a good look at already, and we'll see what happens to it. But I don't think it's imminent or it's immediate. But technically, you have the freedom to go and buy other kind of assets here. Now, will we wake up tomorrow morning and go and buy telecom towers? I don't think so. But if we stay in the power sector, I think there are enough assets that will come up and subsets. I think renewables is one, but there could be some other interesting ones. I'm sure Pratik knows about it more than I do. But the idea is to make this a long-term platform.
Right.
And I think also it's good to look at other subsets because you get a bit of diversification.
Right.
Of the kind of cash flows, the kind of counterparties that these cash flows have. So I think that will be a longer-term strategy.
Pratik, coming to you on the transmission sector. Now, you've been in this space for so long. There is, of course, a huge lacuna, a huge requirement, and given the thrust that the government has on the renewable energy space also, the transmission lines and that infrastructure has really not been able to catch up with it. So there is a latent demand for this. But on the other side, it also has several issues like right-of-way problems, settlement of compensation, clearances, land acquisition, and many others. How do you assess the situation of this sector?
Speaking about the challenges you mentioned, absolutely, greenfield projects in India, especially linear projects, are filled with challenges, rights of way, terrain, crossings, you name it, weather, climate, you name it, and it's there. But that's exactly the role of the developer, and that's exactly what Sterlite does well. We learn how to plan for these challenges, we de-risk the projects, we put the best teams and best partners on the ground, and that's the reason we've completed projects as much as 9 months and sometimes 14 months before schedule. So that's what private sector as well as companies like Sterlite bring to the table. Of course, the government needs to make it easier to do rights of way, to do land acquisition, and even some of the government financing needs to become quicker.
Yes.
But we think that things are on the right track.
Right.
And the next 5 years could be a very interesting time for India's electricity sector.
So Sanjay, execution is the key when it comes to the infrastructure space. How do you see the rest of the sector? Is it the first of the many investments that KKR could make in infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have obviously a lot of interest in India, you know that. If this thing works out well and gets off to a good start, which I think it has, you just have to look at this conceptually. I mean, the government of India has really driven the infra spending on its own balance sheet.
Yes.
So a few people obviously like Adani, Sterlite, Reliance, who are building on their balance sheet and now are in a way offloading it. But that's only a small drop.
Yes.
The real big balance sheet that's been driving investment spending today has been the government of India. So you can just think of the kind of capital that can come in if they were to take some of the matured assets that they've been driving and catalyzing growth, and you could convert them into InvIT structures and REIT structures. And if you have the matured assets, core assets, well regulated, no going back on policy changes and regulations, then I think you can attract a lot of capital.
But which subsets of infrastructure are you
I don't know what all will
looking
evolve. As I said, I'm not an expert at this right now. This is the first deal for us. But if you look at worldwide, just a whole set of assets that can give you long-term contracted revenues can really be underwritten with a much lower cost of capital.
Right.
And we can always try to underwrite the large private equity deals, but some of these infra deals can actually absorb a lot of capital. And you'd be surprised, given the pension funds, the sovereigns, the endowments, the insurance companies. You're just talking of a different scale of capital that can come into India, not only to help developers like Sterlite, but the government of India itself.
Right.
That's where the real big money can come in. So I think this could be the beginning, and I hope it is, because I think India does need capital.
Oh, of course. Infrastructure is hungry for cash, and long-term debt market is just not available. So that requirement is there. But one may argue, Sanjay, that with this investment, you have only taken a cautious approach on infrastructure by investing in a tertiary or a supporting system rather than a mainstay infrastructure. Would you also take a plunge in that, or do you think that's still a cautious approach?
I don't think Pratik is going to agree that this is a tertiary segment or whatever, but I think this is a pretty core infra. I mean, transmission grids are very, very core. So I don't think it's about being cautious, unless you're saying, why aren't we getting into toll roads right away?
Or a power unit, or...
No, but but power unit is different. Yes. I think toll roads could be another one. So look, I think it'll take time. As I said, we're not an expert at this. We're learning a lot of the space. I think India is also learning how to obviously keep its promise if they want to get this kind of capital.
Right.
So I think it's just a starting point.
All right, and final question to Pratik. Pratik, what are the approvals required, and what is the timeline you're suggesting for this particular transaction to be completed? And how would you aptly put this transaction, a huge monetization effort by Sterlite Power, or an exit in a phased manner?
Okay, so on the approvals, there are a bunch of approvals. Some are from the unit holders. As you know, in this structure, or many key decisions like M&A, like debt raising, have to be put up to unit holders, including if we have to bring in additional sponsor or change the shareholding of the investment manager. All of those are subject to unit holder approval, and we've called for an EGM, and we expect that to happen in this month. As far as there are a few approvals that SEBI has to give, and I can't put a timeline to that, but maybe a month or two we can expect for that to happen. So once those have come through, the first tranche of the transaction, the two assets that I mentioned, will fold into IndiGrid, and IndiGrid unit holders will start to enjoy the benefits of that distribution. Coming to how I would phrase this transaction, so this transaction is definitely a partnership. Sterlite is a stated developer of assets. Sterlite will never have the balance sheets that the KKRs and the large pensions and sovereigns in the world will have. Sterlite is a specialist developer which takes greenfield risks and converts a paper project to a long-term annuity operating project. And there's a lot of capital like KKR, etc., who are looking to invest in these long-term annuity operating projects, whereas there is limited capital that is looking to take greenfield risk. And Sterlite is, through this partnership, de-risking its growth strategy. It is bringing a lot of new capital by bringing in investors directly into its operating assets, and thus freeing up its dry powder to invest back into global development projects in countries like India, Brazil, and beyond.
All right, Pratik, Sanjay, thanks so much, gentlemen, for spending time with us and sharing all the details of this significant transaction between KKR and IndiGrid. Thank you so much for joining us on CNBC TV18. With that's a wrap on Big Deal.